Hi, my name is Talia, and I'm a member of the Student Leadership Board here in Seattle, Washington, and I think that remembering the Holocaust is important because the Holocaust is such a critical part of Jewish history, and while it's not the entirety of Jewish history and is only fairly recent Jewish history, it provides a clear example of modern-day anti-Semitism and white supremacy in our world that we really need to learn how to eradicate and prevent from happening in the future.
The Holocaust killed so many Jews, and we need to make sure something like this never occurs in the future.
I see so many parallels from almost 100 years ago and today that we need to speak up about.
We need to be aware of how small biases can blossom into atrocities.
Things like anti-Semitism and discrimination against LGBTQIA plus people and discrimination against people with mental health issues.
The message we need to remember is to celebrate diversity. An action of learning and remembering will teach us that we can prevent, we can change, and what we can do better. This is a lesson of respect, friendship, and one of the hope for the future.
It gives us a chance to recognize all the lives that were lost and to educate others on how to prevent genocide and hate from happening in the future.
It also reinforces important lessons regarding our moral responsibility to each other.
It teaches anyone who learns about it values of compassion, individualism, and trust. To not only keep the memory of its victims alive, but to deepen our understanding of the world we live in, who we are, and what we can become.
If we don't remember it happened, then it's going to happen again.
Because those who do not learn from history are condemned to repeat it.
It requires us to activate the powers of scholarship and kindness to confront the steps of genocide as part of our work toward liberation.
It encourages us to think about the resilience people had after the Holocaust and how important that was to creating the world we live in now, and how we can use that same resilience today to make a more just future for all.
Just because you are different doesn't mean you are any less important. Hatred has no place here.
In 2021, my hope is for the world to become more tolerant and more respectful of one another. Together, we want to become change makers and make the world a better place.
We must acknowledge the wrongdoings and the tragedies so that history does not repeat itself. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Talia, and I'm a member of the Student Leadership Board here in Seattle, Washington, and I think that remembering the Holocaust is important because the Holocaust is such a critical part of Jewish history, and while it's not the entirety of Jewish history and is only fairly recent Jewish history, it provides a clear example of modern-day anti-Semitism and white supremacy in our world that we really need to learn how to eradicate and prevent from happening in the future.
The Holocaust killed so many Jews, and we need to make sure something like this never occurs in the future.
I see so many parallels from almost 100 years ago and today that we need to speak up about.
We need to be aware of how small biases can blossom into atrocities.
Things like anti-Semitism and discrimination against LGBTQIA plus people and discrimination against people with mental health issues.
The message we need to remember is to celebrate diversity. An action of learning and remembering will teach us that we can prevent, we can change, and what we can do better. This is a lesson of respect, friendship, and one of the hope for the future.
It gives us a chance to recognize all the lives that were lost and to educate others on how to prevent genocide and hate from happening in the future.
It also reinforces important lessons regarding our moral responsibility to each other.
It teaches anyone who learns about it values of compassion, individualism, and trust. To not only keep the memory of its victims alive, but to deepen our understanding of the world we live in, who we are, and what we can become.
If we don't remember it happened, then it's gonna happen again.
Because those who do not learn from history are condemned to repeat it.
It requires us to activate the powers of scholarship and kindness to confront the steps of genocide as part of our work toward liberation.
It encourages us to think about the resilience people had after the Holocaust and how important that was to creating the world we live in now, and how we can use that same resilience today to make a more just future for all.
Just because you are different doesn't mean you are any less important. Hatred has no place here.
In 2021, my hope is for the world to become more tolerant and more respectful of one another. Together, we want to become change makers and make the world a better place.
We must acknowledge the wrongdoings and the tragedies so that history does not repeat itself. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm Dee Simon, the Barral Family Executive Director of the Holocaust Center for Humanity. I'm coming to you live from our museum's library. I'd like to thank our sponsors Eugene, May, and Patty Schuster, the Jewish Federation of Greater Seattle, National Endowment for Humanities, For Culture, and the Claims Conference. Thank you to our many partners and event patrons for supporting our virtual programs. If this was an in-person event, I would pause and welcome the Holocaust survivors who are with us today. Thank you. One of the most shocking pictures from January 6th insurgents on our Capitol was the image of the Camp Auschwitz sweatshirt. It's a reference to the Nazi concentration camp where over 1 million Jewish people were murdered, and it's a clear symbol of anti-Semitism. Paradoxically, Auschwitz, by its very existence, challenges civil society to confront hate and indifference. As we mark the 76th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, we fight hate with knowledge and memory. Today, on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, we mourn. We honor the victims and rescuers, and we fulfill our promise to remember. Throughout history, cultures and religions have passed down memory through stories. Stories can teach history, and they're the best tool we have for teaching empathy. At the Holocaust Center for Humanity, we are the keepers of hundreds of stories. They exist through artifacts, testimonies, memoirs, art, diaries, and letters. The letters for me, the letters are extraordinary, because they represent a slice of time, a day, a moment, a minute. The writers have no knowledge of what's to come. They express their dreams, their hopes, anger, and despair, and ultimately, they reveal their experiences in that moment. In our museum, we have a number of letter collections. The Wilsey letters reveal a U.S. Army doctor working in a field hospital in Dachau just after liberation. He tells his wife through hundreds of letters what it's like to repair bodies and souls in the very depths of hell. The Hamburg collection shares the story of a family separated by the Holocaust, a child in San Francisco and his family in Germany. Hundreds of letters beginning with optimism, hope, shift to perseverance, then misery, and eventually the letters are censored. And then no letters arrive from Germany. A letter not in our collection, in the Ringelsblum archives, changed my understanding of the Holocaust and the effects of starvation. The letter was written by a young man who describes one day in the Warsaw Ghetto, a day filled with nothing but hunger. As he plots and plans to find food, he describes how he walks past a starving child. He couldn't be bothered. He could only think of where he needed to be to get that next piece of bread. Later that night, while writing his letter, he cries while trying to justify his actions. His letter challenges us to comprehend starvation and the limits of our own humanity. It's because of the unique way letters transmit history, memory, and empathy that today we bring you the opera Dear Erich. Through music, Ted Rosenthal's letters bring us to a deeper understanding of the immeasurable consequences of the Holocaust. Ted is on the faculties of the Juilliard School and the Manhattan School of Music. He's received numerous awards and commissions for his work. He has performed in symphony halls and with some jazz musicians, most notable stars. Dear Erich was commissioned by the New York City Opera, where it premiered in 2019. I met Ted several years ago at the home of Eugene May and Patty Schuster, where he performed Dear Erich. We knew right then and there that we had to bring him back. And so today it's my pleasure to bring you Ted Rosenthal, accompanied by Seattle's opera singers Megan Parker and Robert McPherson. At the end of the performance, we'll have a live question and answer session with Ted Rosenthal. Please type in your answers at any time to the question and answer features at the bottom of your screen. And if you're on Facebook, you can put your comments in the live comments. Thank you so much. And Ted, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ted Rosenthal, and I'm very pleased that the Holocaust Center for Humanity has invited me to be with you tonight to present musical selections from my jazz opera, Dear Erich. First, a bit of the backstory. The box of letters sat in my home all the years I was growing up. Letters written in Germany, mostly by my grandmother Herta, to my father Erich in Chicago. Erich escaped Nazi Germany in 1938, a few months before Kristallnacht. I never heard my father discuss the existence or the content of the letters. After he died in 1995, I came upon the box, brought it to my home, and left it in the attic, untouched for another 20 years. In 2015, I was invited to my grandmother's hometown of Bad Camberg, Germany. Volunteers from the local historical society, led by Doris Amelung and Dr. Peter Schmidt, sought to remember the lost Jewish community by reconstructing the old Hebrew school. They invited Jewish descendants to attend the ceremonial reopening. This is where I met Eugene May and later his wife Patty Schuster, who were also the generous donors and underwriters of tonight's event. I mentioned the box of letters to Dr. Schmidt, curious to know whether the townspeople could help unlock their secrets. Dr. Schmidt was interested and volunteered to translate the letters, perhaps not realizing there were over 200 of them. My grandmother's letters started coming back over the Atlantic Ocean, this time in English, in digital form. They opened a world for me with vivid depictions in a personable voice, the voice of a grandmother I never knew, describing family, friends, people, and places that were part of my father's life. Through the words of my grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins, week by week from 1938 through 1941, I could feel in starkly personal terms the institutionalized hate that befell them, their frustrated efforts to emigrate, and the walls of persecution closing in. Although my grandmother's language was always understated, whether due to her wry sense of humor, concern about censors, or not wanting to alarm my father, I will never know. Her letters filled in so many holes about my family history. At this point, I'd like to share a few historical images. The first image is an envelope containing a letter, of course, and you can see the return address says Herta Sarah Rosenthal. I learned that at a certain point, the Nazis made all the Jews, the women, call themselves Sarah. You can also see the Nazi stamp and the stamp Geöffnet, which means opened and surely censored. The second image has 4 photos. Clockwise from the top left are my grandparents in Germany, Herta and Theodor, who I'm named after. My father's house in Wetzlar, Germany. My father, Erich, in his 20s and as a young boy. The next image is a photo of my grandmother, Herta, and her niece, Gerda. The next image is a letter written to my father when he came to Chicago by my grandmother. And the next image is a letter written to my father by his uncle Bernhard. It features in bold, Hilfe, Hilfe, Hilfe. Bernhard was not as understated, and of course that means help, help, help. The next image is a letter informing my father he is being kicked out of school in Germany because he was Jewish. And the final image is in 2016. Dr. Peter Schmidt and I are discussing the letters at Dr. Schmidt's home in Germany. He, of course, translated all of the more than 200 letters that came to my father between 1938 and 1941. And the revelations from the letters and learning of my family history that I never knew about inspired me to write a jazz opera, Dear Erich. I was fortunate to have 2 childhood friends who actually knew my father, Erich, and who were in upper management at New York City Opera, the general director and the chairman of the board. They were intrigued with my proposal, and they agreed to develop Dear Erich, and we did 2 readings to develop the piece, and Dear Erich was premiered in January of 2019 at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City. It received much favorable press and had 4 sold-out performances. Dear Erich tells the story of a family's dual fates, a son's journey and new life in the new world, and his family's cruel demise by the Nazis while he was powerless to help. Dear Erich also reflects on the impact of the Holocaust on the children of survivors. A central theme of the opera is survivor guilt. Can one be able to live and enjoy life fully while others close to you are in harm's way and ultimately cannot be saved? How much can one do to help another in need? The opera's scenes of immigration and refugees in crisis raise moral dilemmas that resound to this day. Finally, the work stands for the power of remembrance, not just to honor the past, but also to root us in the present and chart our future. Setting Herta's letters to music was quite intense, magnifying their emotion. Hearing these wonderful artists sing them is incredibly moving. Seeing how they touch artists and others of different backgrounds is doubly gratifying. In crafting the story, some elements are exaggerated or made up. But even with dramatic license, Dear Erich is a family story. As in the opera, the act of remembrance is both profound and healing. For tonight's musical performance of selections from Dear Erich, I am joined by soprano Megan Parker and tenor Robert McPherson. We begin tonight's musical presentation at the beginning of Act 2. We are in modern-day Chicago. Erich is old and ill. Freddie, Erich's son, laments Erich never sharing his past or the letters and regrets the distance between them. Carmelita, Erich's nurse, herself an immigrant, explains the immigrant's desire to look forward, not burdening your loved ones with your painful past.
Everything my father never told me, locked up in this box for all these years. He never said a word about the war, about his mother, my grandmother. I had a grandmother, but the door to everything that happened then was locked. He hid away this box, these letters, all his joys and fears and guilt and terror, tears. Why now, Father, you don't know how much I long to know you, love you. Rob all, catch a movie, build a castle in the sand with you. But you've always been so very far away. And now you pick today to leave and say hello and make me grieve. A man you never let me know, make me grieve. A man you never let me know. But you've always been so very far away. And now you pick today to leave and say hello and make me grieve. A man you never let me know, make me grieve. A man you never let me know. everything away, but what's the cost? I don't know who you are. I don't know where I come from. I don't know anything. I feel so lost.
He had reasons.
What kind of reasons?
Parents protect their children in ways you may never understand. My children will never know me, not completely, never can. Knowing me means guilt and sorrow, horrors too dark to tell, acts I'll never speak of, and people I could not save. In my dreams they visit me, every night they visit me. It's not for them to know, not my children, not them. It's not for them to know, not my children of America. I came to America, so lucky I made it here. My parents were left behind, my family left behind. All of them disappeared. They must all have died. I grew up with an uncle. He passed 10 years ago. So now the past has gone away. It's for the best, I know. My children will grow up happy, American and happy. Why should they know? Why should I burden them? I cannot even say the words, not to anyone, but especially not to them, children of America. Let them be American.
Flashback to Chicago, 1938. Erich receives his first letter after arriving in Chicago. His mother, Herta, is concerned about his health and whether he can stomach the American food. His father, Theodor, is concerned about business and talks about the decline of his family business in Wetzlar, Germany, and also wonders whether Erich can support himself in America.
Erich. are you health-wise? What about your eyes? Who darns your socks, repairs your clothes? Do you do your own washing? How do you stomach the American food better than he?
Lieber Erich, business is quiet, and we do not suffer from overwork. The people in Dortmund are selling their business this week. The J. Adler Company in Frankfurt went bankrupt. We have nothing to claim. I cannot renew my license as a scrap metal dealer. I no longer fulfill the minimum requirements. You know what that means.
Did your typewriter arrive home? Did your classes begin? What kind of exams do you have? Will you visit the relatives in Newark? What about the friends in St. Louis? Is it far? Will you go to the synagogue on a holiday? You should
Jews all must take the same first name.
I'm Sarah.
I'm Israel.
We have registered with the U.S. consulate in Stuttgart to get a visa.
We were given number 14,036.
Seligmans have 18,500.
In Berlin you cannot get a number.
You see what kind of a crush there is.
Did you speak to the Chamber of Commerce concerning a job? When the semester is over, it's time to make a living. What impression did you get of the scrap metal shops you visited so far?
Chicago, 1940. Erich and his girlfriend Lily are out on the town, going to jazz clubs, dancing, and falling in love. Later, Erich grows pensive and thinks of his family trapped in Germany and sings, "How can I feel so happy, but I do."
Feel the beat.
Feel it where?
In your feet.
Oh, down there.
You really make me laugh. You're witty.
You're pretty.
I spy right there in your eye. You're hiding a naughty, mischievous streak.
You think I need these glasses to see a curvy, nervy little bourgeoisie?
Better than gold.
I think that she's sold.
I can't believe it.
Hard to conceive it.
I've never met a guy
I feel something.
Don't be square.
Should I care?
You crack me up.
I'll sew you up.
You really fill me up with laughter and laughter and laughter.
And I never knew I could heal. I'm healing with love, feeling your love. And all it takes is knowing that you're near me. Who knew this was where my life would steer me?
What a world with love that is turning.
Let's pretend the world isn't burning. Let's pretend the world isn't burning. How can I feel so happy? But I
Good to see you smile.
Did I just forget the ones that I knew?
Love them all the while.
How can I revel in your touch so warm, your hand in mine? When I know that far away I left their misery behind. Outside the world is madness, they're going through hell, and yet when I'm with you, I feel like all is well. It doesn't seem quite fair that I should feel.
Sometimes it feels unfair.
This happiness I don't deserve at all.
Sometimes this seems unreal.
At home, my family faces 1,000 acts of hate. It's selfish, love is selfish, and yet I feel no, won't say great. But you make me feel so happy.
I also feel happy.
How can I know the things that I do? And yet I know I love you. How can I feel so happy? But I do.
December 1938. Back in Germany, Hertha writes to Erich about Kristallnacht and his father being taken by the Nazis.
It is a heavy blow for the two of us, and we will miss him terribly. Please go to a synagogue and say Kaddish. Erich, I embrace you in my mind. You're deeply saddened, mother.
Chicago, 1943. Erich and Lily are married and have a newborn daughter. The letters have stopped, and Erich is tormented, not knowing what happened to his mother. Singing Always Believe, with a lyric by Leslie Rosenthal, my wife and co-librettist, Lily encourages Erich to look forward and live.
When loss and loneliness surround you, when dark thoughts tumble through your mind, remember I love you, I
Finale, always remember. Herta and Dr. Schmidt admonish us to always remember what happened. Freddie and his sister Hannah sing about the healing power of remembrance.
Ted, Megan, Robert, thank you so much. We now have lots of questions, and I hope we have a little bit of time to get through them all. One of our attendees, Gary, writes, Ted, that was so beautiful and moving. After receiving the translated letters, What made you want to write an opera?
Well, thank you, Gary, and always such a pleasure to see such wonderful artists perform this piece. So thank you again to Megan and Rob for that wonderful performance. I was so moved by the revelations from the letters that were translated by Dr. Peter Schmidt that I knew I had to create something. And I am a jazz pianist and composer, and I felt I wanted to create a large work. I have written some extended jazz compositions. I've written 2 piano concertos, and I knew it had to be dramatic. So even though it was my first effort in this regard, I decided I would pursue writing a jazz opera and was fortunate to see it come to fruition.
Thank you. We have another question from Janelle. Ted, I've never heard of the term jazz opera before. Can you explain what that means?
Well, that's a very good question. There really are very few official jazz operas. I would say the closest thing that comes to mind, and a piece that was a loose model for me, was Gershwin's Porgy and Bess, which I believe when it was first written and produced might have been referred to as a folk opera, but not actually a jazz opera. But I believe jazz can encompass a huge variety of emotion. The idea that Erich, who emigrates from Germany and finds really his new life in Chicago, in America, which is emblematic of democracy and freedom and improvisation and many of the same characteristics that are part of jazz and the ideals for jazz, I think was part of my thinking in making a jazz opera, as unusual as they are. And part of my work is bringing genres closer together. So I would work with the opera singers and get them to be a little jazzier, and I'd work with the jazz band and get them to follow the opera singers in some of their flexibility and rubato in the way they phrase. And so I think we all came together quite nicely.
Ted, can you tell us a little bit about sort of the emotional experience that you went through in discovering these letters and reading them after they were translated?
Yes, well, this piece was really quite unique for me in that it was both an artistic endeavor like none that I had taken on, but the personal dimension just packed such an incredible emotional punch and had a profound impact on me just receiving the first handful of translations of the letters that my father never discussed, and as is fairly common among Holocaust survivors, was not forthcoming about information about this painful past. And learning about my grandmother, aunts and uncles, and different people in my father's world that he never really shared was quite profound, because it gave me insights into really the family history, and not that we were just plopped onto this planet, the first generation, that there was a whole history of people and relationships, and the relationship with his mother was particularly poignant. The fact that he lost his mother in this most horrible way, and doubly horrible because he never actually knew what happened to her. He just knew she was murdered, but he didn't know any of the specifics. So it was quite a profound experience for me. And then to watch the characters of the opera come to life, so to speak, in words and music that I've written is also just an incredibly and amazing experience, because although ultimately they become characters in an opera, this is still, my mother, my father, my grandmother, my grandfather. So it's been quite a journey.
Question from Raymond. Have you considered publishing the letters with your commentary and maybe a link to a performance of the opera? I think this would be a great resource for educators and students and would teach the public in a unique and refreshing way.
Oh, well, that's a very interesting question. In fact, I did a program at Rutgers University here on the East Coast in New Jersey that was sponsored actually by another childhood friend of mine who is one of the leaders of their Jewish Studies program at Rutgers. And the title of the program was Letters to Erich. And it did have an educational slant to it where we discussed the letters and how letters could be used to teach about the Holocaust. And of course, I played in this program, I played clips from the opera as well. So we have pursued that idea. I haven't gone about officially publishing all of the letters. You know, honestly, in 200 letters, you know, I think it probably would make sense to pare down so you get to the heart of really the most important matters, because many of the letters were just the comings and goings of, you know, very more mundane kind of things. But then, of course, there was the Kristallnacht letter that you heard Megan sing so beautifully, a portion of. And by the way, as a composer of a piece like this, you know, the letter had, you know, 3 or 4 times more words in it than I was able to set to music, because otherwise we'd be there all day, because the music, of course, spins out at a much slower pace than when you're reading a letter. But I do appreciate that idea, and I do obviously think that letters are a wonderful way to teach about the Holocaust. And I think combined with selections from the opera, it could be quite powerful to do more programs like that.
Holocaust Center for Humanity is working with the Seattle Opera Children's Group to do the production of Brundabar, which I think will be coming up soon. So we're very excited about that. So I think there's an interest for sure.
Yes.
Here's a question for Robert. Where are the letters now?
Well, they're one door away from the attic. We took them out of the attic, but they're in the upstairs part of my home. I had great interest from the U.S. Holocaust Museum to ultimately, you know, have them preserved and digitized through their institution, and I indicated that I was open to doing that, but I wasn't ready to give them up yet. You know, I still look at them. I usually look at the photocopies or even the translations because I don't actually read. I can't really read the German longhand. But at some point, I will most likely give it to the U.S. Holocaust Museum, where they can be both preserved and also digitized and be seen by the world that way.
Great. Here's a comment from Marlene. Just want to say, I wish we could give you a prolonged standing ovation. Thank you so much, in capital letters. Last question. The opera was very beautiful and moving. Were there any songs that were more difficult or easier to write than others, whether it's from an emotional or musical composition standpoint?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, because there are a lot of moods. There are jazzy moods, and then there are obviously very impactful descriptions of really the horrors of the Holocaust. So clearly, you know, there were a number of people that contributed to the text of the opera. My wife and myself did a lot of it. There were some other contributors, and of course the letters themselves. So I would say the most emotional, the most difficult were, you know, some of the letters, and especially that Holocaust, what I refer to, as the, the Kristallnacht letter, where literally my grandmother had to inform my father that her husband and his father died, and you know, there were a lot of tears flowing in the Rosenthal household for a long time as I was putting the music down and then seeing how it fit different lines from that letter. So that was definitely a very emotional thing to go through.
In closing, can you tell us if there's any performances coming up or anything that you're working on now?
Yes, there are a few irons in the fire. Of course, Of course, the pandemic has thrown the operatic and the arts world into kind of disarray, but there were some things brewing before all that started. There's going to be a concert version of the opera with 8 singers and a jazz group up in the Berkshires at a place called the Mahawi Theater, a lovely Art Deco theater not far from Tanglewood here on the East Coast. And there's some talk of some things brewing in Europe. And I'm hoping the Seattle Opera Company might be interested in the future as well. I know they've done another piece that's in the jazz opera genre. So I continue to look for more opportunities, both in full performance, in concert performance, and educational outreach as well.
Thank you so much, Ted. This concludes our program for the evening. I invite you to stay on for 2 more minutes. If you hadn't seen the Student Leadership Board video in the beginning of the program, I invite you to stay on and listen to it now. And thank you so much for joining us tonight on this day, International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Talia, and I'm a member of the Student Leadership Board here in Seattle, Washington. And I think that remembering the Holocaust is important because the Holocaust is such a critical part of Jewish history. And while it's not the entirety of Jewish history and is only fairly recent Jewish history, it provides a clear example of modern day anti-Semitism and white supremacy in our world that we really need to learn how to eradicate and prevent from happening in the future.
The Holocaust killed so many Jews, and we need to make sure something like this never occurs in the future.
I see so many parallels from almost 100 years ago and today that we need to speak up about.
We need to be aware of how small biases can blossom into atrocities.
Things like anti-Semitism and discrimination against LGBTQIA plus people and discrimination against people with mental health issues.
The message we need to remember is to celebrate diversity. An action of learning and remembering will teach us that we can prevent, we can change, and what we can do better. This is a lesson of respect, friendship, and one of the hope for the future.
It gives us a chance to recognize all the lives that were lost and to educate others on how to prevent genocide and hate from happening in the future.
It also reinforces important lessons regarding our moral responsibility to each other.
It teaches anyone who learns about it values of compassion, individualism, and trust. To not only keep the memory of its victims alive, but to deepen our understanding of the world we live in, who we are, and what we can become.
If we don't remember it happened, then it's gonna happen again.
Because those who do not learn from history are condemned to repeat it.
It requires us to activate the powers of scholarship and kindness to confront the steps of genocide as part of our work toward liberation.
It encourages us to think about the resilience people had after the Holocaust and how important that was to creating the world we live in now, and how we can use that same resilience today to make a more just future for all.
Just because you are different doesn't mean you are any less important. Hatred has no place here.
In 2021, my hope is for the world to become more tolerant and more respectful of one another. Together, we want to become change makers and make the world a better place.
We must acknowledge the wrongdoings and the tragedies so that history does not repeat itself. Thank you.